Hello and welcome to the Runners World podcast with me, Rick Pearson.
And me, Ben Hobson.
Today we're speaking with Tom Craggs. He's going to tell us the answer to that eternal running question. How do I get faster?
It better be really good.
Oh, yeah. It's a big question, isn't it?
It's a huge question. There's probably like some caveats that we should like launch into this. That like when we say faster, we mean we mean your personal speed.
For sure.
We're not trying to define fast in the running world. It's all those sorts of things that people get like on, like Strava titles.
Yeah.
Fast.
Yeah.
Slow, easy run. And
Yeah,
everyone else
yeah,
goes, oh, that's my race pace. It's that. So when we say it's about applicable elements of like training and how you can adapt your body to basically run faster.
Exactly.
Any distance, any ability, just faster.
It's a huge thing to take on in a 25 to 35 minute podcast, but we're going to give it a go. We're nothing if not ambitious here.
Nothing if not, well, best be fast with it.
Yeah. Hey, how's your own running been? You've been, you've been running among the animals, haven't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, and this might influence a future podcast. I have no problem. I grew up running in North Wiltshire and would encounter animals on a varying size and attitude.
Okay.
On different runs, friendly ones, mean ones, grouchy ones.
Yeah.
But I was running the other day and back in the West Country and came to like a gate that was right next to a farm.
Right.
And as I sort of turned around and there was no option apart from try and get past these two horses, lovely horses. And I thought horses are friendly, but in my pocket I had like some energy chews, and they could smell them. They quite clearly was because that's where the noses went. Oh, hello, and then, big old shunty nose.
Oh, I love a goo.
Yeah. Can't get enough Morton horses. Absolutely love it. And then so I was then sort of trapped by these two horses, and I suddenly went, well, I kind of know that horses aren't like vicious, but still these guys aren't letting me get anywhere. So I had to sort of like push past them, and then I had that sort of thing where I was behind a horse, and I mean that's obviously the worst place to be. Yeah, especially if you just like walked off with their sweets, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then I was slightly worried. I sort of slightly raised the air, sort of like, oh well, all right, this is fine. But then within about 50 yards was another field that was full of cows, and I was just like, maybe we should do a podcast about how runners should deal with animals.
I think the cow thing is. I've done a bit of running on the South Downs Way, and there's lots of cows.
Oh, loads. Yeah.
And as a city dweller, you kind of think, because you hear horror stories about cows, right? Like actually, they're not like the kind of sweet bovine kind of calm.
They're
presence.
Murderers, aren't they? Oh no, let's get to the truth.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want beef with a cow.
So
it's kind of like, what do I do? Do I go round it? Do I go through the cow?
Yeah, I mean, and then you start like working out how you're like, should you be bowing your head and not making eye contact with the cow?
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? So
we need a podcast.
We need a podcast, don't we?
We need a podcast on this.
So we'll cover off. I reckon we should do obviously dogs.
Yeah,
because they're probably like a runner's most sort of
and the most common thing you're going to come across as an animal, isn't it?
And then anyone who runs in the countryside will have cows and other livestock.
Yeah,
let's do that. I mean, sheep. They're just lovely.
Sheep's fine, isn't it?
Fine,
but a ram.
The
ram is. You shouldn't ultimately. There should be certain. You're from the countryside, you know this, but you shouldn't, as a walker on a public route, encounter certain animals such as a ram and such as a bull. It shouldn't happen very often, right?
I mean, they should be in different fields, really.
Yeah. So,
responsible
but still,
farmers. Yeah.
we'll try and tick that one off as well, because I mean, you don't want to be getting rammed.
No way.
No way.
There we go. So and other bits of running. Fine. We were just talking
avian life, the sort of the talons, the kind of the great falcon.
Yes, we need to include that as well.
Yeah.
But running's been fine. We were talking just a second ago about strength work, which again, another podcast coming soon.
For sure.
But I've been neglecting it, and I can feel it.
Yeah.
So this is just a small little courtesy reminder to everyone: do your strength work
twice a week.
Because I haven't been, and my knees hurt again, and I need to do more gym stuff.
Yeah, I think it's often the way, isn't it? You kind of unfortunately, you need a little tell from your body to be like, oh, actually.
And gladly not a big tell, hopefully, just the smallest of little, like, all right. Oh, someone's been neglecting their thing. Yeah, that's me. So, I might ease off. Might not do any running and just focus on that for a bit.
Yeah.
It's winter now anyway, no matter.
Base training.
Whatever, something like that. So, maybe I'll just do some hardcore gym stuff.
Sounds good, mate. Sounds good. Hey, look, let's get on our guest of the week to answer the eternal question: how can I get faster?
How can I get? Please, Tom, tell us.
Guest of the week, here in the studio. Guest of the week, sometimes on the phone. Could be an athlete, could be a physio, or a complete unknown.
Our guest this week is a national endurance manager for England Athletics and a columnist for Runner's World. He's here to tell us the answer to the eternal running question: how do I get faster? So, Tom, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we've got a big one to tackle this time.
Yeah.
Big one, limited time. Let's go.
Definitive answer. Right, broadly speaking, Tom, what needs to happen to a runner's body to allow them to run at quicker speeds?
Yeah, so when we talk about running faster, things can get a little bit complex, and some of it's around semantics. What do we actually mean about getting faster? I think for most of the listeners, getting faster is a relative term. So what we mean is we want to get faster over a particular distance or a particular event. Now that's a little bit different from being literally able to run faster in a mechanical sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. So when we talk about speed training, and it's a term that's thrown about a lot as distance runners, how do I do speed training? I want to get faster, I should do some speed training. For most running coaches, speed training isn't really the type of sort of interval training or fast training that most distance runners do. When we talk about speed training, we're talking about training that is specifically designed to get you recruiting fast twitch muscle fibers and allow you to mechanically move your body quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Essentially, sprinting, or a kind of distance runner's version of sprinting, and that does play an important part of getting faster, which I'll come on to. But for most people, if you want to get faster as a distance runner, we need to get ourselves what I'd say sort of metabolically fitter. So we need to improve our cardiovascular fitness and the way that our body utilizes energy and oxygen, and make ourselves essentially more economical, more efficient in the way that we use oxygen, so as we can run these longer distances that most of us train for. And when I say longer distances, this could be anything from 800 meters up to an ultra marathon. Effectively, that's long distance in running terms, to allow us to do that more economically. Now obviously, if you're training for an 800 meter race, there is a greater weighting towards your body needs to be able to mechanically move very quickly, as well as having this kind of good system of utilizing oxygen to produce energy. And we need to be able to recruit other energy sources as well. If we run for longer distances, 5k, 10k, marathon, etc., more and more, and the longer that we go, getting faster is more and more weighted towards becoming a test of how well we use oxygen and how well we use energy, if that makes sense. And that's important because generally, a lot of distance runners, particularly most experienced distance runners, when they talk about, I want to get faster, they'll often think that the best way to do that is, okay, well, let me chuck interval training in. Let me do some faster running and I'll get quicker. That can happen, but it isn't the only route to getting faster. Sometimes you can get faster by running more slowly. And that sounds counterintuitive, but we can get faster by running more slowly if, as a product of running more slowly, our body is more efficient, more economical in how it utilizes oxygen, and that we're able to control fatigue a little bit better when we race. So when we train at low intensities, and we talked about this before, when we train at low intensities, or when we train at sort of a controlled discomfort, what some people call threshold or tempo running, our body can learn to, or becomes quite good at using it the way that it shunts oxygen around your body, and we start to recruit more capillaries, so the little blood vessels that shunt oxygen around to your working muscles. Our body can utilize and expand upon the mitochondria, which is kind of like our energy factory, if you like, within our cells. So all of those processes that can actually take place running slowly will actually help us run quicker. So sometimes running faster in a race isn't always about running faster in training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is.
So we come at it at two angles. We need to be mechanically able to run quicker, but we also need to be able to have the right utilization of energy systems and be cardiovascularly kind of what I don't like this term particularly, but aerobically very strong. So we need to be good at utilising oxygen. So getting faster, it's complex, and you need to understand, I think, your starting point. What are my limiters? Am I being limited because actually I could be quite a lot fitter from a cardiovascular standpoint, or you know what, I'm pretty fit. Perhaps I've just run a marathon and I've kind of got all of this. I'm really good at my kind of aerobic side of my training, but actually I haven't really done much in the way of fast running recently, in which case maybe it is the quicker work that you're missing. So I think it's about understanding your starting point.
So is there anything, Tom, you mentioned the intervals there and people just going out and doing the sort of tempo and harder stuff, can that be counterproductive to getting faster? And I asked just on the fact of incorporating things like stress into training and fatigue and things like that, and how the sort of about that, as you say, striking a balance between adaptation being good and then overdoing it.
Yeah, definitely. So there's two aspects to that. One of them is if you do a lot of higher intensity training. So what does that mean in practice for most people listening? Higher intensity training, let's say you're doing interval training at intensities that you might only be able to hold for 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes in a race situation. So for most of the listeners, that might be running at 3k pace, 5k pace, 10k pace, and you're doing a lot of that in sort of interval sessions in training. For some people listening, that will represent a higher injury risk. Not for everybody, but for some people it will do. Because we're recruiting more muscle fibers, there's greater impact, and we're creating a bigger stress, which means your body needs to recover from that stress from a kind of a hormonal point of view, if you like, an adrenal point of view. So we elevate the stress hormones. Are your recovery protocols, is your wider life stress in a good enough place to be able to recover from that high intensity work? So we can increase our injury risk from doing higher intensity work. For some people, though, it's not just about the injury risk, it's about what is their key limiter at the moment in training. So I'll give you an example. Some of the very best middle distance runners, so these are fast runners, if you like, in the world at the moment, don't do masses of really high intensity training. So if I think of the Ingebrigtsens in particular, kind of famous at the moment, or Jakob in particular, of being even when they're doing their sort of interval training, for want of a better word, they're very tightly controlled with how hard they run. And it isn't just about injury management, although that is an aspect of it to a point. What it's about is about really looking at saying, well, what makes me good as a distance runner? In terms of what my body needs to do, supporting my physiology, what do I need to be really good at doing? And by running his faster sessions in a really controlled way and being very aware of not going beyond, and again we talked about this on previous podcasts, you delve into it if you want to, kind of lactate threshold or lactate turn point as some people might call it, staying in that area that is a kind of controlled discomfort. So for most people, not going much beyond probably a 10k to half marathon type effort. They are really trying to focus on developing the aspects of their energy system and their fitness that are most suited to this kind of aerobic cardiovascular type of racing that we all do. And even for like a mile, 1500 meter race, primarily our body is very reliant on a good aerobic system, rather than doing this really high intensity anaerobic, what we call, so reliant on energy systems that rely less upon oxygen to produce energy, which our body draws energy in different ways. But this high intensity stuff, so our 1500 meter pace running, 3k pace running, 5k pace running, tends to focus a lot more on what we call these kind of anaerobic energy sources. Well, actually, they play a part in some of the races that we do, but they don't play as big a part as the bulk of what we do, the foundational stuff, and that's the kind of cardiovascular stuff. So the reality is you can get very fit not actually running that fast sometimes in training.
This is the Runner's World podcast.
Am I right in thinking that there is a program out there for a certain person who could do, like you're saying, some 10k and half marathon stuff, Ingebrigtsen type effort, and then really quick stuff that is more about mechanics, i.e., I mean, you can tell us about this, but we're talking about sort of 6 seconds of effort. Can you tell us about that? Because is that a way of almost like not cheating, getting quick, but it feels like a bit of a hack on some levels.
Yeah, sure. So obviously one of the dangers, if you're doing a lot of easy and steady running and maybe some of this very controlled tempo threshold type running, the risk of that, of course, is that you don't get that kind of feeling of higher intensity and quicker running that you then have to go and explore when you race, particularly over like 3K, 5K, 1500 meters to a point 10K as well, depending on how quick you are. So we can kind of go some way to doing some of that genuine speed development with these really short, sort of higher intensity efforts that are more akin to sprinting. And I guess for most distance runners, that's quite a difficult thing to do on the flat. So for most of us, or for most runners that I work, they might start doing that on a hill. So maybe you kind of go, you've got a hill, and you do a really good warm up with all the bits and pieces you need to do to warm it well, and then you get near maximal intensity, which for most distance runners is probably more like a 400 meter type intensity, but whatever. 8, probably absolute maximum of 10 seconds, but probably more like 6 to 8 seconds. Really ask of yourself the very best you can give on each footstep, if you can imagine that. Like each foot strike, you're trying to recruit as much intensity as you can. 6 to 8 seconds, and then take a really long recovery, maybe 2 minutes. And you might repeat that, 4, 5, 6 times. And over the course of a number of weeks, as you get used to that sort of intensity, recruiting those muscle fibers, you might start to take that work onto a flatter route. So we shift away from the hill, because the hill can kind of almost mimic some of the speed, and we start to practice doing that on a flat. And then maybe, if you've got that aerobic side of your training right, that's the stuff that you can start to extend. So maybe you kind of shift that onto some 100, 150 meter efforts, or you do more of them. Or you extend it over time to maybe 200 meters or 400 meters. So we build speed first, and then we extend it, if that makes sense. But that needs to sit concurrently to all of the easier stuff. You cannot, for most distance runners, unless you're doing something else in your life that is really good at developing your aerobic system, you're doing loads of cycling, commuting to and from work, or whatever. For most of us, we can't get faster by just doing the quick stuff alone, if that makes sense. It's got to sit in tandem with that big foundation of aerobic training, if that makes sense. Oh yeah,
definitely. And on that note of the additional training outside of running, is faster, does that mean more gym? Does that mean, or is that is there a sort of a point where you have to be like, well, if I want to run faster and I need to have that adaptation, I've got to start lifting some different weight?
Yeah, look, gym with a purpose, I think, is probably the way that we would think about it. So strength work with a purpose. I think it's very easy to do strength work, but not really necessarily get that much stronger. So in case you're not really doing strength work, but it's easy to go to the gym and move weights about for a long period of time, but not necessarily develop the type of muscle fibers or neural recruitment which will help you run faster. So what do we know? Well, different athletes need different things, and some of that's based upon genetics. Okay, so some athletes will respond to going to the gym on a slightly lighter weight and circuits and things like that. Some athletes need to recruit those big muscle fibers, those fast twitch muscle fibers, with heavier lifts and doing less reps. But certainly things like plyometrics, very controlled plyometrics. So like these jumping exercises. And I don't mean really big stuff that a sprinter might do. It can be really simple hopping and skipping exercises sometimes can be really effective as a part of that getting faster mix, because it's about being able to, for our bodies to be able to almost have that bit of kind of muscular tension, if you like. It's very hard to run quick if you don't have that stiffness when your foot contacts the ground. So there's a bit of developing that reactive stiffness and force. So that's when the plyometrics come in. And that's why generally for most distance runners, getting a little bit of guidance, like not everybody can afford their own strength and conditioning coach or PT, but getting a little bit of guidance about, okay, what am I like? What's my physiology like? And, with the limited time that you've got available, what's the most effective way you can use that kind of non-running time to contribute to getting faster? Because certainly if you go for nothing, just trying to get into the gym and doing very heavy deadlifts or very heavy back squats and high intensity plyometrics, that is an injury risk, or it will leave you tired probably. So it's a balancing act. But you've got to think about what the reasons why you're doing things, if that makes sense. And definitely a little bit of high intensity work, getting used to recruiting those fast twitch muscle fibers, a little bit of plyometric work can definitely for a lot of runners make quite a big difference, I would suggest. And studies do back that up for sure. Particular plyometric work, very important aspect to running economy, as much as we understand it at the moment.
How much of this higher intensity speed work does a runner need to do? We don't have to talk. Everyone's going to be running different amounts of days in the week, so let's talk sort of percentages, Tom, maybe, in terms of that compared to easy running.
Yeah, look, we talked before about this kind of 80-20 type approach, and I think that's something that people can explore. I think that maybe that balance will probably shift depending on where you're at in your training a little bit. That said, I think for most people, we might at times over-rely, and this is a bit of it's almost the opposite of what people think. I'm not doing enough high intensity work. I think sometimes we can try to shortcut getting faster by doing higher intensity training, and it's not really how your body works. The higher intensity work does something almost slightly different. So that hard interval training is complementary to doing your kind of easy, controlled and very controlled tempo and threshold work and easy and steady runs. You kind of need to do a bit of a blend of both, if that makes sense. So how often? Well, I would say probably, I'd say for the vast majority of runners, certainly no more than 20% of your weekly training volume. What does that mean in practice? Well, probably if I was training 4 or 5 times a week, only one of those sessions would be some kind of higher intensity work. Now you might be training less than that, and if you're training less than that, well, you don't necessarily have to think in a 7-day cycle, because if you think, well, I'm only training 2 or 3 times a week, so I'm going to do interval work every other time I train. Well, you might get away with doing that because you're not training very often, so your injury risk is quite low. But it won't necessarily get you any fitter. Well, it might get you fitter, but it might not necessarily get you faster. So at that point, that's when you say, well, actually, forget the high intensity work, and actually, if you could squeeze in an extra run in your week, you'll probably get faster. Even if it's just a 30-minute job, you're probably going to end up getting faster. Or you kind of go, look, instead of planning my training on a weekly basis, I'll extend it out to 10 days, 2 weeks, and I'll do, an interval, or I'll have higher intensity training every 10 to 12 days or something like that. So you kind of get creative with it. That said, I think my key message here is, I'm not saying that higher intensity training doesn't get you faster and isn't complementary to getting faster. It is, but it won't get you there in a race unless you do that controlled, all of that easy running, steady running, and some training sessions where you're running faster, but you're very tight with what we call your intensity regulation, and don't run too hard. So yeah, frequently, but probably not as frequently as people actually end up doing a lot of the time.
Tom, I think that's a masterful attempt to talk about speed work in 20 minutes. I feel like people can listen to that and they're gonna walk away from this podcast knowing a lot more than when they start.
Away,
yeah, but not too often.
Not too often.
They're gonna sort of
not too often. Not too fast.
They're gonna move away in a kind of controlled discomfort. Is there? Yeah, that can be the subtitle of our podcast.
Yeah, look, I think it is. Think of it as you've got a speed side to your training, you've got an endurance side to your training. The further you can be raced, the probably more polarised that is. So your speed work is probably very short, very quick and high intensity. And then as you move towards your race, it probably gets a little bit slower and a little bit longer. We kind of extend it out, but build the foundations first. So your easy, steady runs, some very controlled tempo work, and then your foundation of speed is, like I said, these really short efforts that we extend over time.
Tom, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom again. We really appreciate you getting on the podcast talking about this.
It's a pleasure. No, it's always.
We'd love to have you back on at some point to sort of discuss,
try and tackle another massive topic.
Yeah, like what's the meaning of life? Perhaps in just in 10 minutes would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, I'd have worked it all out. So give me 2 or 3 weeks notice, and I'm sure we'll get there.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Tom.
Cheers.
Take it easy. Thanks.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of this week's Runners World podcast. A huge thanks to our guest, Tom Craggs, and to you, of course, for listening.
You can subscribe to 3 issues of Runners World for just £5. Head to runnersworld.com/UK/podcast offer to get this exclusive listener offer. Also, just subscribe to the magazine as a whole. That's a pretty good idea. You get 12 issues a year. It's good stuff. Thank you for listening. You'll hear from us next week.